We are continuing in our series on scandalous faith. And just after Easter, we wanted to enter into a series where we talked about, different people of Scripture that we see their lives lived out. But even as we look at these people of Scripture, we realize, wow, these are some really messed up people. These are people that are not perfect people. They, contrary to sometimes what we think, hey, God's laid out these perfect examples of Scripture that we're supposed to emulate. If anything, we look to these people in Scripture and we realize we do not need to follow that. We need to learn from that. We need to learn what not to do, and we need to lean into what to do. And that's what's beautiful, is God knows us, and He still chooses to walk with us even in our unfaithfulness. God is still faithful. And so as we look at this, we see this, and many times God's grace to people is scandalous. It's just shocking. It's like, you shouldn't do that. If a friend came along and someone was doing something to your friend or another family member, you would say, run from that situation. Like, set some boundaries. But God, in His extravagant grace and mercy and faithfulness, continues to show up in a very, very powerful way. And so we look at this scandalous faith. And we've been walking through different people of Scripture, and this is what's crazy, is God, He created the world, and things went awry, and then He said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a nation where they are going to be my people, and I'm going to be their God. And so to start this nation, He started with one man named Abraham. Now, you would think if He's going to start a nation to demonstrate to all the peoples of the world that He is God and they are His people, He would have chosen the perfect guy. Abraham was not. He was willing, he was righteous because he trusted God and he was obedient to God, but he wasn't always perfect. And the decisions that he would make along the way, you were like, I don't think you're supposed to do that, Abraham. I don't think that's God's design. And so he would do this. Well, so Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, and we looked at Isaac a little bit, and we see, okay, here's Isaac, and Isaac wasn't perfect either. And then Isaac and Rebekah had Jacob, and now you're looking at Jacob, and you're like, this isn't perfect or whatever. And so it's weird that God chose this lineage of people to develop this entire nation that would be His people and He would be their God, but it's of these imperfect people. But that's the kind of God we serve. That's the kind of God we worship. That's the kind of God we respond to, who speaks to us and saves us. And so we've got to know that. Today we're going to be talking about Jacob and Esau. Now, Jacob and Esau were twin brothers born of Isaac, and we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be talking about this battle between these brothers. Have you ever had a falling out with someone so deep, so painful, that reconciliation seemed impossible? Maybe it was a friend, maybe even a sibling, or even a parent. And those relational wounds can run deep, especially when betrayal or manipulation is involved. In Genesis, we come to a scandalous story of Jacob and Esau. They were twin brothers, okay? Twin brothers caught in a web of deception and anger and heartbreak. And Jacob, who was the younger, schemes to steal Esau's birthright and blessing. And Esau, furious, plans revenge. And their story is full of conflict, but it doesn't end there. The story of Jacob and Esau is not just about sibling rivalry. It's about God's scandalous grace and how it can show up right in the middle of relational chaos and transform hearts. And today we're going to be looking at 3 different movements of God's grace in this story and how they speak to our lives and relationships today. Now, before we get into this, we got to do some background to understand, okay, where are we in the story? What's taking place? Who is Jacob and Esau? And I want to fill you in. So follow with me as we talk about some background information. Jacob and Esau were twin brothers, and they were born to Isaac and Rebekah. Even before they were born, there was conflict. Even before they were born. Scripture tells us the two babies struggled inside the mother's womb. And when they were finally born, Esau came out first, but Jacob was right behind him, grabbing his heel. That moment set the tone for their relationship, okay? Esau, he grew up to be a rugged outdoorsman. You know, he's just like that macho guy, that superhero outdoorsman. He's gonna go kill his food. That's what he is. That's who he is. That's all about Esau. And he was the favorite son of Father Isaac. Okay, so Isaac's favorite son was Esau, the outdoorsman. Jacob, on the other hand, was quieter, more of a homebody, and his mother, Rebekah, this was her favorite son. So of the two, her favorite son. Now here's what's crazy. You know, somebody asks you, which of your kids do you like most? You know, you don't answer out loud, right? You may have something in your head, but you don't answer out loud, okay? Scripture just goes ahead and says, hey, Isaac, he had a favorite son. It was Esau. And Rebekah, she had a favorite son. It was Jacob. So now we've got this family dynamic. You can already see these, seeds sown of dysfunction. You're like, hey, this isn't going to turn out well. Do you think this is going to turn out well if publicly, there's a favoritism that's going on? All right, so check this out. In the ancient world, being the firstborn son came with serious advantages. It wasn't just about being born first. It meant you were set to inherit the family legacy. This was called the birthright. The birthright gave the oldest son a double share of the family's wealth, as well as the future leadership of the household. He would become the next patriarch, carrying on the family name, business, and spiritual responsibility. Now, that's the birthright. In addition to the birthright, there was also something called the father's blessing. This was more than a kind word or personal prayer. It was seen as a powerful prophetic declaration over a child's future. It often included words of destiny, success, and divine favor. Once given, the blessing couldn't be taken back. It carried weight not only in the family, but in how the person would live and be remembered. So there's this birthright, and then there's this blessing, and it comes into play in this story. So in the story of Jacob and Esau, there were two defining moments that shattered their relationship. The first was when Esau, who was the firstborn, he had the birthright, he gave away his birthright to Jacob. That's the first issue. All right, here's what happened. One day Esau comes in from the field. He's absolutely exhausted and starving. Can you imagine? You go hunting, you're out there, you're exhausted, you find nothing, and you realized you just went for a hike. It wasn't a hunting trip. It was just a hiking trip. Now he's back. He's starving. He's at this point of feeling like death. And it says, Jacob, seeing an opportunity, offers him a bowl of stew, but only if Esau will trade him his birthright. A bowl of stew for birthright. You're like, really? Anybody in their right mind wouldn't do that. However, how many of you have been at a point of death and you're like, hey, what's the point of a birthright if I'm not going to be around to experience this birthright? I need a bowl of stew. Like, that's how desperate Esau had gotten. However, that's how conniving Jacob was. Instead of just saying, hey, brother, here's a bowl of stew, he's like, hey, trade me your birthright for this bowl of stew. Man, this is like, you can kind of see who is the kind of person Jacob was. So Esau says, what good is my birthright if I'm about to die? And he agrees to the deal. He gives away something sacred and valuable for a temporary fix. It's a moment that shows how easy it can be to lose sight of long-term purpose when short-term desires scream the loudest. All right, so that's the first situation. The second moment is even more intense. As their father Isaac nears death, he decides it's time to give a blessing to Esau. Okay, so Isaac's the father. He's near death. He's going to give a blessing to Esau. We've already talked about the birthright. Now we're giving the father's blessing. Isaac sends Esau out to hunt and prepare his favorite meal, and then he will bless him. But while Isaac is out, the mother Rebekah, who favors Jacob, comes up with a scheme. She helps Jacob disguise himself as Esau by dressing him in Esau's clothes and even putting goat hair on his arms to mimic Esau's hairy skin. And Jacob takes the meal to his nearly blind father Isaac, pretending to be his brother. Isaac, confused but convinced, gives Jacob the blessing meant for Esau, declaring over Jacob wealth, success, and leadership. Now, when Esau returns and realizes what has happened, he's devastated. He weeps. He pleads with his father for another blessing, but it's too late. The words have already been spoken over Jacob. And at this point, Esau isn't just angry, he's furious. He vows to kill Jacob. And their relationship is completely fractured, and Jacob is forced to run for his life. And the two brothers won't see each other again for over 20 years. During that time, Jacob built a family and wealth, but also wrestled with guilt and fear over what he had done. Can you imagine carrying something of that weight with you? Those thoughts don't go away. Like what's inside doesn't go away. Even though you've left and you had to run for your life, it's still carrying with Jacob. Even though he's experiencing wealth, he's experiencing family, he's experiencing goodness, there's still some tension, some major tension, some major fracturing on the inside. Eventually, God leads Jacob back toward home, which meant facing Esau. And terrified of what his brother might do, Jacob prepared for the worst. But instead of revenge, Esau ran to him, embraced him, and forgave him. It's a scandalous story full of deception and dysfunction and deep pain. And it's also a story where God's grace breaks through in surprising ways, transforming people, healing wounds, and restoring relationships that seemed beyond hope. And it's right there in the middle of all the family dysfunction, betrayal, and broken trust that we see the first glimpse of God's grace. God's grace doesn't wait for things to be cleaned up. It enters the mess. How many of you know that? How many of you feel like we've heard that God enters our mess, but how many of you feel like, man, I've got to clean up my mess first. I got to clean up things before God's going to do anything. But instead, the God that we serve, He enters into our dysfunction. This is a pretty dysfunctional family. Can we agree? Like, if anything, this should have been an example of, hey, here is the righteous people of God, and here's the righteous lineage of God. And let me tell you about these other crazy people next door. You know what their parents did? They favored their sons. And then the mom tricked, the father and all this kind of stuff. You're like, that should have been some other family. That should have been some other people, but not God's people. But this is God's people. Like, these are the fathers of Israel. Like, this is nuts. These are the patriarchs. These are the people that we worship and say, not worship, but these are the people that our lineage is from as Israel. And these are the kind of people they were. This is pretty broken. But God shows up in our dysfunction. Let's look at Genesis chapter 27, verses 30 through 36. Verse 30 says this, "And as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had left the presence of his father Isaac, his brother Esau arrived from his hunting. He had also made some delicious food and brought it in to his father. And he said to his father, let my father get up and get some of his son's game so that you may bless me." This is Esau talking. But his father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" And he answered, "I'm Esau, your firstborn son." And Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably. Who was it then?" He said, "who hunted game and brought it to me. I ate it all before you came in, and I blessed him. Indeed, he will be blessed." And when Esau heard his father's word, he cried out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, father." But he replied, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." So he said, this is what Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me twice now. He took my birthright, and look, now he has taken my blessing." Did you hear just this deep pain from Esau? Like he wept. I assume he wailed with sounds that you would never imagine that would come from an outdoorsman like Esau. He wept because he knew how important this blessing was and would be. And it was stolen from him. Even to the point that he knew his father couldn't give him another blessing. But he asked for it anyway. Bless me too. Do you have a blessing for me too? So then he says, rightly, his name is Jacob. What does that mean? Jacob's name literally means heel grabber. You remember? Like they're in the womb. They're wrestling in the womb. Scripture tells us that. Esau is born first. Jacob is like, "Oh, not so fast." And he's holding on. There's something that Jacob has against Esau that it causes Jacob to be a deceiver. And so this term Jacob was not only a heel grabber, but was a deceiver. Anytime you heard the term Jacob or were called Jacob, it was this idea of being a deceiver. Can you imagine? Like we moved to Canada years back, and we went through the immigration process, and they're asking different things. And then one of the questions they asked was like, "Are you going to keep your name?" And I was like, "Why would I keep my name? This is my name." And they're like, "Well, I mean, some people from other countries are coming in with a name that's a little bit more harder to pronounce or a little bit harder to kind of grasp. So, like, what kind of do you want to change your name? Do you want to say kind of what's your name that you will go by, whatever." So we kind of chuckled about it, and we're like, "Well, we're not going to change our names. We're going to stick with the ones that our mamas gave us. So we're going to go with that." And we're like, "Do people really change their name?" They're like, "Yeah, you'll be surprised." And we're like, "Oh, really?" And they're like, "Yeah, you want to know what the most famous name that people change their name to?" And we're like, "What?" "Mickey Mouse." I was like, "What?" "Well, Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse. Okay." Like, okay, so now you're walking on the street, you're meeting people, and someone introduces themselves as Mickey Mouse. All right, so what are your thoughts? Like, you're like, okay, this person really likes Disney, or this person is really into this, or this person's a lunatic, this person's crazy. Like, is this person in their right mind? Can I be friends with this person? Is this a safe person? Like, you're asking all these questions because there's something in a name. Now, many times in our names, I go by Tim. You don't know what Tim means, but you know that it is an identifier of me. Okay, so I'm Tim. We go by Tim. If they showed up and he said, "My name's Jacob," they're like, "Oh, you go by Deceiver? Your name's Deceiver?" Like, that's just not, like, Jacob should have changed his name. Like, he should have gone to the immigration office and say, "I'm going to go by a different alias. Like, this is what we're going to do." And so Jacob is here. He's walking around. People understand this as deceiver. And he lived up to the idea of being a deceiver. With the help of his mother, he tricked his father and stole Esau's blessing. And this wasn't a minor offense. It was a betrayal of trust, a family torn apart by favoritism and manipulation. And yet, even in this mess, God's purposes were still at work. Jacob didn't deserve grace. Can we agree with that? Like, we need to see this story for what it is and say, okay, Jacob did not deserve grace, okay? But grace was pursuing him. God isn't waiting for you to clean your life up before he shows up. And you and I need to recognize that. We may not deserve grace, but God's grace is pursuing us and shows up in our dysfunction. Where in your life have you seen God's grace meet you in your mess, not after you've fixed it? So Jacob ran from his brother, but he couldn't outrun God. And years later, on the eve of facing Esau, Jacob found himself alone. No more tricks, no more hiding. And it's in that quiet, vulnerable space that God's grace met him again, not to punish him, but to change him. So get this. Jacob is coming back. After 20 years, he's coming back. He's going to have to face Esau. But he knows things aren't right. And you know what's not right first? It's what's within Jacob. That's what's within. That's what's the issue he was wrestling with, he was struggling with. And we begin to see how God's grace transforms us on the inside. God's grace transforms us on the inside. So the day before, on the eve before Jacob sees Esau, and he's assuming things are going to go really bad. That's his assumption. Check this out. Verse 24 of Genesis 32. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Real quick. This man, this is where it says, and God met Jacob. The Lord met Jacob. So some believe this was an angel. Some believe this was some kind of manifestation of God himself. So it's this idea that Jacob met with this man, which was a representation of God, and wrestled with him until daybreak. Verse 25. When the man saw that he could not defeat Jacob, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," he said. "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Can you see this picture taking place? Jacob is wrestling with this unknown man, Jacob's realizing I'm wrestling with God. I'm wrestling with the Lord himself, and I want something. What does Jacob want? Blessing. He got blessing from his father. Isn't that enough? Isn't that enough to cover over Jacob scheming out Esau's birthright? Isn't that enough to cover over Jacob scheming out Esau's blessing that was supposed to go to him from his father? No. That wasn't enough. And now he's before God, wrestling with God and saying, "I'm not going to let go until you change my life." Did you hear me? Jacob is crying out. He's lived with this for more than 20 years. And he's saying, whatever this is, there's nothing that can make this smooth. There's nothing that can take this away. I'm going to wrestle with God in such a way, and until God changes my life forever. You and I are invited into that, to do the same. You see, we want a blessing from God. We want God to make everything smooth. But how many of us are saying, "God, there's something on the inside of me that I need you to change and alter so that from here on out, my life is different and changed"? That's what Jacob was asking for. That's why he was wrestling with God. And this isn't a matter of God not being strong enough to take on Jacob. All right? That's not the question here. The question is, hey, we're wrestling. I need to move on, Jacob. And Jacob's like, don't leave me until you change me. Change me from the inside out. Change me in such a way that it's almost unrecognizable. Change me. And I think in that moment, God realized, I'm going to change you, but you can't walk around with a name called deceiver. I'm going to change your name too. And he says this, you will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Years after running away, Jacob is finally forced to face the consequences. And the night before meeting Esau, he wrestles with God. This isn't just a physical wrestling. This is a spiritual wrestling. And Jacob wrestles with his past. He wrestles with his identity. He wrestles with his fear. And in that struggle, he is changed. He goes from being known as Jacob, the heel grabber, the supplanter, the deceiver, to Israel. His name is called Israel now. One who wrestles with God, and God prevails. God gives him a new name, not because Jacob earned it, but because grace transforms even deceivers into people of purpose. God's grace doesn't just forgive who you were, it reshapes who you're becoming. It doesn't just forgive who we've been. Many times we find our identity in what we've been or what we've done or even the poor choices we've made or some of the things that have happened to us. And God says, hey, those things have happened, but I have a future for you. And you are no longer identified by your past. I'm going to reshape your future. I'm going to give you a whole new identity. What identity or wound from your past might God be inviting you to wrestle through with Him today? You would think the story ends with fear or revenge, but God had been working in more than just Jacob as the two brothers finally meet. Okay, so this next day, Jacob is going to meet Esau, and he's fearing for his life. He's like, this is not going to go down well. Esau is out to get me. He wants to kill me. Surely he's been harboring these feelings for the last 20 years. We witness one of the most unexpected moments in Scripture, a reunion soaked in grace, not bitterness. And what was broken is restored in a way only God could have orchestrated. So we see that God's grace restores what seems beyond repair. We have those things in our life. We have those things. We've got those relationships. We've got something where we feel like, hey, this is beyond repair. Seriously, Tim, like this is beyond repair. Like I'm good. I probably need to make it right with a coworker or a neighbor or something like that. But like there's some relationships that are just beyond repair. In Genesis 33, verse 4, it says this, "But Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Then they wept." This is perhaps one of the most surprising moments in the book of Genesis because Jacob approaches Esau terrified and guilty, but Esau doesn't attack. He embraces, he weeps, he forgives. There's no logical explanation for this except for grace broke through. Not only did God work in Jacob's heart, but He worked in Esau's heart. Reconciliation happens where it shouldn't have been possible. Grace, God's grace can rebuild bridges we thought were long burned. And here's the real truth. A lot of times we don't give God a chance to work. A lot of times we don't give God a chance to show up in a way that you really can't explain this. I was talking to my daughter. She's processing college, and I was telling her some of my stories because I'm both blessed and cursed with a memory of just stories. And I was talking about different roommates, and I remember this guy across the hall my first semester, and there were two roommates, and one of the guys was just terrible. I mean, he was just a terrible individual. He was a terrible human being. And I just thought, man, this guy's just a jerk. He all the decisions that you're not supposed to make, he's just making them. And by the end of the semester, I had become friends with his roommate. And that guy, he and I decided to room together. And so I'd become real good friends. But it was like this jerk of a guy. Here's what's crazy. Fast forward a year and a half, I'm now really good friends with that guy. That guy changed his life completely. Let me back up. God changed that guy's life completely. In a way that if you would have asked me, hey, are you going to be friends with that guy? I was like, no, not a chance. Like, he needs to move on and just go do something bad somewhere else. Like, that was my mentality for this guy. And to think that I would become good friends with this guy. And this guy would go into ministry and serve in churches and lead people in faith blew my mind. And it reminded me, as I was telling my daughter, hey, God can do the impossible. He can do the unimaginable. He can do things that don't make sense to us. He can do things that we don't even have faith that can be done. He can change lives. Is there a relationship in your life that God may be nudging you to seek healing or take a first step toward reconciliation? Let's enter into a time of reflection. I want you to think about this message. And think about what you heard today. Think about the story of Jacob and Esau. Think about Isaac and Rebekah and just the dysfunction of the family that was just at hand and how Jacob and Esau were born in this and contributed to this. But also realize, yes, there was betrayal. Yes, there was dysfunction. But grace also followed them. Grace showed up in the deception of Jacob, in the wrestling of his soul, in the forgiveness of his brother. And that grace is still showing up today. You may be in a season of relational pain. You may have regret. Usually whatever relational strife you have, you may have contributed to it. Let's be honest. You may have contributed to it. Jacob did a lot. And we need to invite God's grace to do something that God's grace is capable of doing. And you may wonder if restoration is even possible. But God specializes in the impossible. I want to invite you to bring your own battle of the brothers to God. Maybe a broken relationship. Maybe your own hidden shame. Maybe your own relational fears. You may feel like Jacob, limping from your past, unsure of what's ahead. But grace is already running toward you. Will you receive it? Will you extend it? What part of today's message do you need to invite God to do something with in your own life? There's no perfect people here. We all have something. What do we need to invite God to do a work of God with? How do we need to ask God for His grace to show up in a certain situation in our lives? How do we need to ask God's grace to show up and mend our own hearts, as tender and as sensitive as it may be? How do we need to ask God's grace to show up and change us and giving us a new name, reshaping our future? Where do we need God's grace to show up?